In the late summer of 1778, a young tailor named Robert Townsend sat behind the counter of a dry goods shop on Manhattan's Wall Street, surrounded by British officers buying ribbon and lace for their wives. He smiled, made polite conversation, wrapped their purchases in brown paper, and listened. Every word he heard, every troop movement mentioned in passing, every ship that entered New York Harbor, he would soon commit to memory, then to paper, written in a code only a handful of men on Earth could read. New York City in 1778 was the beating heart of British power in America, occupied, fortified, and watched. And somewhere within it, an ordinary merchant was about to become one of the most consequential spies in American history. 2 years earlier, the Continental Army had suffered a catastrophe. In the summer of 1776, George Washington had lost New York City to General William Howe's forces in a string of devastating defeats. Worse than the loss of the city itself was the reason behind it. British intelligence had consistently outmaneuvered the Americans. Washington's own attempts at espionage had ended in tragedy, most famously with the execution of a young schoolteacher named Nathan Hale, captured within days of volunteering for his first mission behind enemy lines. Hale had walked into New York with almost no training, no cover story that could survive scrutiny, and no support network. He was caught and hanged, and his death became a warning. Washington never forgot. Intelligence gathered carelessly was worse than no intelligence at all. By 1778, the war had shifted. The British still held New York, using it as their principal base for operations along the Atlantic seaboard. Washington's army, camped in the countryside beyond the city, faced a persistent and dangerous problem. He could not see inside New York. He did not know British troop strengths, ship movements, or invasion plans until it was often too late to respond. He needed eyes inside the city. But this time, he needed something Nathan Hale never had: a system built to survive. The man Washington turned to was a 24-year-old cavalry officer named Benjamin Tallmadge, Yale-educated Connecticut native who had grown up alongside a boyhood friend named Nathan Hale. Tallmadge understood, perhaps better than anyone in the army, exactly what had gone wrong before. He would not send in a lone volunteer with no training and no way home. He would build a network, one designed around patience, discretion, and people who could move through New York without ever drawing suspicion. Tallmadge began recruiting not soldiers, but civilians, farmers, merchants, a tavern keeper, people whose ordinary lives gave them a reason to be exactly where the information was. The first recruit was Abraham Woodhull, a Long Island farmer from Setauket with family ties on both sides of the conflict, a man who could travel into occupied New York on the pretext of selling produce without a second glance from British sentries. Woodhull was nervous by nature. He worried constantly about exposure, about the noose that had taken Hale, but he agreed to help, and under the alias Samuel Culper, he began making regular trips into the city. Woodhull's information was useful, but limited. He was an outsider in New York, someone who visited rather than belonged, and British officers were far less careless around a visiting farmer than they were around men they saw as part of the city's daily fabric. What the ring needed was someone already woven into New York's social and commercial life, someone the British trusted enough to relax around. That person was Robert Townsend. Townsend was a Quaker merchant, quiet and unassuming, a partner in a dry goods business, and discreetly a contributor to a loyalist-leaning New York newspaper. A cover so effective that British officers considered him one of their own community. He moved through coffee houses, taverns, and drawing rooms where officers spoke freely, never suspecting the mild-mannered merchant across the table was memorizing every word. Townsend became the second Samuel Culper Jr., and his reports, smuggled out under Woodhull's name to preserve the fiction of a single source, became the Ring's most valuable intelligence. But information gathered in New York was worthless if it could not reach Washington's headquarters, and this was where the true danger of the operation lived. Every letter had to cross miles of contested territory, through a stretch of land patrolled by Loyalist raiders and British cavalry before it could reach the Continental Army at all. The chain that carried it was almost unbearably fragile. Townsend would write his report in New York, using a numerical cipher developed specifically for the Ring. Nearly 800 code numbers, standing in for names, places, and common words, so that even a captured letter would reveal nothing without the key. He passed it to a Long Island tavern keeper and courier named Austin Rowe, who rode nearly 55 miles round trip from Setauket to Manhattan, and back, often in a single day, risking capture at any checkpoint along the way, simply for the excuse of buying supplies. Rowe would deliver the message to Woodhull's farm, and this is where one of the Ring's most remarkable safeguards came into play. Directly across the water from Setauket on the Connecticut shore waited Caleb Brewster, a blunt, fearless whaleboat captain who ran the final and most exposed leg of the journey, rowing intelligence across Long Island Sound under constant threat from British gunboats patrolling those very waters. But Brewster could not simply row to shore and knock on a farmhouse door. He needed to know, before he risked the crossing, whether it was safe to land and whether Woodhull actually had a message waiting. The answer came from a neighbor, Anna Strong. Living along the Setauket shoreline, she devised a signal system so simple it defied detection. A black petticoat hung out to dry among her laundry told Brewster that Woodhull had a message ready. The number of white handkerchiefs hung beside it told him which of several coves to row toward. To any British soldier watching, it was nothing more than washing on a line. To the men waiting across the Sound, it was a coded message that could mean the difference between a successful crossing and a fatal ambush. From Brewster's hands, the letter finally reached Tallmadge, who decoded it and carried it to Washington himself. A single report might pass through 4 or 5 people, cross open water patrolled by enemy ships, and travel dozens of miles. And every single person in that chain had the power to expose the entire network with one wrong word. For nearly 2 years, the Culper Ring operated this way, feeding Washington a steady stream of intelligence on British troop movements, fortifications, and shipping. Woodhull's constant anxiety about discovery was not paranoia, it was a realistic assessment of the stakes. Espionage during the Revolution was punishable by hanging, and the British had already demonstrated with Hale that they would not hesitate. Then, in the summer of 1780, the Ring's intelligence became more than useful. It became decisive. Word reached New York that a massive French fleet and army, commanded by the Comte de Rochambeau, was preparing to land at Newport, Rhode Island, to reinforce the American war effort. If the British struck the French forces before they could fully disembark and fortify their position, the alliance that Washington had worked years to secure could be crippled before it ever contributed a single battle. Robert Townsend, moving through New York's coffee houses and officers' circles, picked up unmistakable signs that General Henry Clinton was assembling ships and troops for exactly such a strike. The information reached Washington through the Ring's usual channel. Townsend to Rowe, Rowe to Woodhull, the signal on Anna Strong's laundry line, Brewster's whaleboat across the Sound, and finally into Tallmadge's hands. Washington now faced a decision, with no room for hesitation. He could not send reinforcements to Newport in time to physically defend the French landing. So instead, he did something that revealed just how deeply he now trusted the network Tallmadge had built. He manufactured a threat of his own. Washington allowed documents to fall into British hands, suggesting an imminent American attack on New York City itself, a city Clinton could not afford to leave lightly defended. Believing the reports and unwilling to risk the city that anchored British power in America, Clinton recalled the very ships and troops that had been poised to strike the French at Newport. The French landed, fortified their position, and the alliance that would ultimately help win the war at Yorktown survived its most dangerous early moment, not because of a battle, but because of a tailor's shop conversation, a farmer's nerve, a whaleboat captain's oars, and a petticoat hung out to dry. The ring's most severe test, however, was still to come, and it arrived from a direction no one expected, from within Washington's own high command. In September 1780, Townsend's network in New York began picking up fragments of something deeply unsettling. Communications suggesting that a senior American officer was in contact with the British, offering something of extraordinary value. The pieces did not fully resolve until the shocking truth broke on its own. Major General Benedict Arnold, commander of the vital American fortress at West Point, had agreed to surrender it to the British in exchange for money and a commission in the British Army. The plot was uncovered only when Arnold's British contact, Major John André, was captured behind American lines, carrying incriminating documents. Arnold fled to a British warship within hours, escaping the fate that had befallen Hale years earlier, a fate André himself would soon meet. Historians still debate exactly how much the Culper Ring's fragmentary intelligence contributed to unraveling the Arnold conspiracy before André's capture forced the issue into the open. What is certain is that Townsend's reports had already flagged unusual and troubling activity connected to West Point in the weeks beforehand, evidence that the ring's value extended beyond troop counts and ship movements into the far more dangerous territory of counterintelligence, catching betrayal from within. The scare rattled everyone connected to the network. If a general as trusted as Arnold could turn traitor, no one was above suspicion. And if Arnold had succeeded, he might have exposed the very spies now hunting for evidence of his own treachery. Woodhull, already prone to anxious caution, grew even more careful. Yet the ring did not collapse. It adapted, tightened its procedures, and continued operating. The Culper Ring would go on functioning until the final months of the war, its members never publicly acknowledged, its existence unknown even to most of Washington's own officers. Robert Townsend's identity as Culper Jr. remained undiscovered by the British throughout the entire conflict, an achievement of discipline and nerve that few wartime spies in any era have matched. When the British finally evacuated New York in 1783, the ring simply dissolved, its members returning to the quiet, unremarkable lives that had made them such effective spies in the first place. For more than a century afterward, their story remained almost entirely hidden. Woodhull, Townsend, Rowe, Brewster, and Strong left behind no memoirs boasting of their service, no public recognition, no monuments. Robert Townsend, in particular, guarded his secrets so completely that even members of his own family did not know the full truth of what he had done during the war. It was not until the early 20th century, when historians began piecing together Washington's wartime correspondence and cross-referencing the numerical cipher with names in the historical record, that the full shape of the Culper Ring finally came into focus. What emerges from that record is not a story of dramatic gunfights or daring escapes, but something quieter and, in its way, more remarkable. A group of ordinary people, a farmer, a merchant, a tavern keeper, a boat captain, a woman hanging laundry by the shore, who understood that a war could be shaped as much by information as by muskets, and who accepted every single day for years a risk that offered them no glory and every chance of a hangman's rope. Nathan Hale's death had taught Washington that courage alone was not enough. The Culper Ring proved that discipline, patience, and an ordinary life carefully maintained could accomplish what raw bravery alone could not. The Continental Army that ultimately marched to victory at Yorktown did so having survived threats the public would never fully know about. A fleet nearly caught unprepared at Newport. A fortress nearly handed to the enemy at West Point. Dangers turned aside not on the battlefield, but in a tailor's shop, a farmhouse, and a small boat crossing dark water under the cover of night.